Call to order the July meeting of the Oxford Planning Commission. Commissioners, you have the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. Commissioner Murphy, all in favor? Commissioner Milam, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Commissioners, I hope you reviewed the minutes. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Is there a second? There is a second. All in favor? Commissioner Milam, how do you vote on the minutes?
Aye.
All right, the minutes are approved. Ben, do we have a staff report?
We certainly do. So I've been with the city since 2015, and ever since then, I've had the opportunity to work with Commissioner Riddell. She started on the Historic Preservation Commission, was served on there for I believe a couple terms, was on there for a while, and tonight is her final Planning Commission meeting, where she's now served 2 terms with the Planning Commission, and we are so very appreciative of all the time and effort that you've put into working on behalf of the city and for the city, and making sacrifices at times with your family. And I'm sure you can speak to how it's changed over time now. You know, you can participate virtually like Kirk is tonight, and where there were other times that you couldn't. But nonetheless, we're so thankful for everything that you've done for the city of Oxford, and for working with us and helping us through the planning process and historic preservation process. And so thank you, and this isn't goodbye. This is until next time when we wrangle you in another commission. So thank you, Judy. We appreciate you.
Enjoyed it.
And we do have a small presentation to make as part of it. I've really enjoyed being on the commission with you for 6-ish years, something like that. I appreciated your voice on the commission, and it's a small thing, but we have this challenge coin to present to you for your service, and on the front it has the seal of the city of Oxford with the Mississippi flag, and on the back it's inscribed Judy Riddell, Planning Commission, 2016 to 2023. And I hope that you'll take this challenge coin to remember your service to the community, and to remember the gratitude from the city of Oxford for that service, and hopefully to remind you to find new ways to serve the city in the future. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel very grown up. Thank y'all very much.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. Anything else from the staff report?
No, sir.
All right. Commissioners, we had 2 cases on the administrative approvals list, one postponed from June. That was case number 2977A for special use, and case number 2979A for site plan approval for the Connie's Chicken location. Both of those were approved by staff. And then we have on the consent agenda 2 cases, case number 2980 for preliminary and final plat for Belt Boulevard Business Park, and case number 2981 for site plan approval at 408 Galleria Lane. Is there a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor of approving the consent agenda? Commissioner Milam, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. That takes us to our public hearings. Please note that we have a few that have been postponed. Our first public hearing for tonight will be case number 2982. Michelle McCauley has filed a request for a variance from section 5.8.4.4a.I, Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District yard standards, front yards, and B, a variance from section 5.8.4.4a.3, Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District yard standards, rear yard for property located at 216 Sibley Street. Ben?
Thank you. This property is just over 1/3 of an acre in size on Sibley Street. The site is currently vacant, but it's also located in the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District. This particular lot is located in the curve of Sibley Street. and it's near Price Street, so it makes that left before it makes the right back to Price Street. The topography of the lot slopes considerably from the rear of the site towards the front of the property. In this instance, the applicant's requesting two variances to, number one, a 12-foot front yard build-to line variance and a 6-foot rear yard setback variance to facilitate the construction of a new 2-story home. As y'all are aware that in the Conservation Overlay District, the front yard build-to line is determined by the really the rhythm of the street, but our practice has been really looking at the adjacent properties to establish a build-to, so not farther back and not closer to. In this instance, the structures of the adjacent property are located 49 feet from the curb, and that's at 210 civilly, and 68 feet from 212 civilly from their property line, not the curb. The applicant's requesting a 12-foot front yard variance to allow the home to be constructed 37 feet from the property line. The applicant contends that Sibley Street is unique in Oxford because it's curvier linear as it traverses the high ridge from North 11th Street down to Price. The applicant notes that the location of this property in the curve is unique, and that coming closer or stepping back would be less noticeable than maybe other areas, and it would not alter the rhythm of the street. The rear setback requirement for the Conservation Overlay District is 20 feet, and in order to push the home as far back from the front property line and trying to get it more in line with the front yard build-to line, it did actually push the home about 6 feet into the rear setback, thus necessitating the variance. And staff is sympathetic to the circumstances in this instance, but it does seem that the proposal is design driven, and the applicant could modify the plan, perhaps to detach the garage, which allow the a detached garage to be, or an accessory structure to be 5 feet from the property line or 5 feet from the home. A different design, maybe with less on the lot, might allow it to be, moved and manipulated in a different way, to mitigate these two variances. And while the impacts in this situation may be less noticeable because the home is located in a curve, staff does not see a hardship to support these requested variants. So therefore, staff recommends denial of both of the variances. The applicant's architect is here, Jonathan Maddox, and he can answer any questions unless you have questions for me.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions from the commission?
I'm Jonathan Maddox with Herworth & Associates Architects. I think Ben and the information that we provided outlines sort of how we're thinking about this. The setback in this case really isn't, a number from the street as it is in most places. It's relative to what's beside it. The houses beside it, relative to many other things in many other parts of the Conservation District, are pretty far off the street. In some cases, almost 70 feet from the curb for the house on the north, that in any other place wouldn't allow you to even build on a lot. As it is, even on the north side, on the 220 Sibley side, where that setback front line crosses our property line is almost in the middle of the lot. It's within 10 feet of the middle of the lot. So it really deprives us of being able to take advantage of the topography that we have. The house at 220 is built where it is, honestly, because that's where the flat spot stops and the slope starts. And our flat area goes much closer to the street than that one does. If you were to look at the steps that are on the house on the other side of us, it takes 24 feet from the front door of that house to get down the steps to their driveway because the topography is so steep. Those steps of that house actually extend further out than the front of 220. So it's just, it's an unusual condition. And thankfully we have variances where we can look at things that don't quite fit into the norm in most other places. As we were saying, based on non-overlay conditions, this would be a non-issue in any other place, or if the overlay district didn't exist. And it does, and that's why we need to talk about the effect of of granting this. But even still, I think we have a very legitimate request for a distance off the front.
I guess I'm a little bit confused. So you said that and what I observed out there is that the front of this piece of property is steep, but you've got the flat portion of your property comes further out,
Right.
right?
Because of the way it's been graded, there is an opportunity here to build closer to the street that didn't really
Right,
exist on the
but,
one
I mean, that's an opportunity and not a hardship, I guess is the point that I'm
Yes.
making. And the overlay does exist, and it's an empty lot currently, correct? And so, I guess it seems like that could be taken into account in the design from the start. I don't really see anything about this property where the overlay is taking a right that the rest of the neighborhood has away from this particular building. Any comments or questions?
Jonathan, have y'all done any, oh, I'm sorry, y'all done it like the idea of doing a detached garage over in the corner? You can be 5 feet off, I would bet, the property line, and then push everything back a little bit, maybe not be such a 12 feet,
Right.
you know, maybe not 12 feet, maybe 6 feet, something
Yeah.
like that.
We have looked at that. You know, it's tricky. I don't know if you took the time to walk to the back of it.
I've spent a lot of time looking at
There's a
this
large
lot
retaining
the
wall
last
back
4
there, and
years.
it kind of cuts off the back corner. It's not as much room as it sounds like in some other places where you get to go all the way to 5 feet and then gain that space. And because of the shape of the lot and the width of a two-car garage, it really pinches down. So, yes, we've been looking at this thing every which way from Sunday to try to figure out alternate ways to achieve what we're trying to achieve in a living space that's only about 2,400 square feet on the ground floor. A footprint that's larger because we have porches in the garage, but, you know, relatively small square footage, to try to figure out how to make that work. There's also, as it slopes up in other directions. I do have a solution that would allow me to detach the garage and build further back from where we are. And if the commission is not so inclined as to grant the request as we've asked for, then I'd like to discuss some other number that you would be more comfortable with. You know, measuring in the curve is very tricky, as I said. You know, every place you measure, you get something different, both on the existing houses and even where you measure along the front of our house. Then where we're measuring to on the front of our house is to the front of our front porch. And the houses on either side of us don't have a front porch. So if they were to ever add one, which many, many houses in these districts do, you know, that I think, you know, would bring those closer to the street, and they should be allowed to do that because front porches are important to the community. But also, because we're really measuring to the front porch, we're not measuring to a big solid wall, we're measuring to something that's open, and the house actually starts 8 feet back.
That was my other question. We don't have an elevation or anything to show you're sort of looking through the front porch when you're driving down the street or coming through around that curve, but we can't see that.
Yeah.
Additional questions?
On the, I think it's page 5 that you sent us, it has a series of about 8 steps to the front from the sidewalk, and then it looks like a flat plane, and then about 5 or 6 steps up.
Right,
Is that right?
yes.
I lived in 210 Sibley for a number of years, and we've been gone from there about 25 years. I think that's the last time the grass was cut, was about 25 years ago. And, but I know that that curve is extremely steep, and we had no sidewalk, and so I was just wondering how it would be great if you had an elevation to kind of give us an idea of what you're thinking. But we don't have
Yeah,
that.
I don't have a front elevation for you. But yeah, achieving a front sidewalk is tricky when it is that steep. We'd like to have a sidewalk so that it's more inviting to the house than just walking up the driveway.
Yeah.
And I think we could make that work with the topography that we have. The purpose of including all those images is just to realize that in the greater scheme of Sibley Street, I mean, there's a setback for every number that you want to pick. I mean, they're all over the place. Some very close, probably even closer than 20 feet in one instance I'm thinking of. and others that are as far back as the ones adjacent to us. But the intent of the overlay district is to achieve harmony within those districts, and I think what we're asking for won't really alter that rhythm and continuity.
Any questions online, Commissioner Mile?
No questions.
I've got a question, and maybe better, well, maybe I dated out, I guess, but I mean, how big are houses generally around this house as far as the footprint, the square footage?
They're very different. The house that we're kind of measuring to most, the 220 Sibley, is a small ranch house. I'd estimate it's probably, 16, maybe to 1,800 square feet, fairly small. The house next door is larger than that. It's a full 2-story. This is a 1.5-story design.
All the houses across the street are good.
And yes, and across the street, there are some much, much larger houses than this, both in terms of total square footage and footprint. It's just, as it is in the older parts of town, there's just a variety of houses and styles.
You thought about making the swimming pool like a different shape to maybe?
The swimming pool really isn't that's not the tail wagging the dog, and it may not really even fit in there very well, particularly as we've tried to push this back. The space we thought we had for that, really starts to go away. The retaining wall that's there, that's existing, and it's a huge drop off. So in the area where the pool is, it's probably 6 to 8 feet tall, and down on the garage end, that wall is well over 12 feet tall, which it's already there. I don't know how it got there, but that wouldn't meet today's requirements. So,
Didn't meet it when it got there.
Yeah. What's that?
I'm pretty sure it didn't meet it when it got there.
I can't speak to that. It's been there for a long time. So even building a pool next to that wall is kind of questionable.
So this is a story, like, I know the one next door is very straight up and down, sort of salt box, I guess, straight up and down house. This one is a story and a half, so
Yes.
it's not as,
It has a dormer in the front across. The front porch too isn't really the full width of the house. It sort of steps out once it gets further back into the site. Our original plan didn't push into the rear yard setback, and when we realized the concern of the alignment of the other houses, in our first attempt at a compromise, we did push the house back into that setback. So that's when we created the absolute requirement for a variance, which is the 6 foot. The way I read the language of the front yard, it's loose, so there is some room for conversation about where that is, but.
my 2 cents is that 12 feet, I would love for it to not be 12 feet, but 12 feet on Sibley is not the same as 12 feet on, I don't know, South 11th or something, where everything's much, Sibley is a much wider range to me of house styles and sizes and setbacks and so on.
And remember, even at 12 feet, we're between 38 and 40 feet from the property line, depending on where you are, because of how the house aligns with the street. So it's not close to the street. I don't think that's the issue.
If you detach the garage, would you catty corner? Is that what you did?
The only way to kind of wedge a garage in, if it was detached, would be to change the alignment with the street a little bit. So yeah, it would have to kind of rotate a little bit. It still needs to say what would feel like pretty parallel to the street for it to make sense, but there's a little wiggle room in there. If it was a square site, it would make it a rectangular site, it would make it a lot easier, but of course it isn't.
Final thoughts or questions? Anyone in the audience wish to speak?
Do we need to get? You mentioned earlier that if it didn't seem like this was a good idea from our discussions today, that there were alternative. Do you want to present or put any of that out there for us to talk about today, or you want to wait?
Well, if if it came to the negotiation portion of this conversation, I do think we would be able to make it work without a rear yard request. We could make it work without a rear yard request, and we could make it work without a rear yard request if we were only 6 or 7 feet forward of 220 instead of 12. We have to make some compromises then in terms of what the client wishes to achieve in their project to do that, but
Let me ask you this, to do that, are you going to make the porch more narrow than 10 feet?
the porch is 8 feet, and no, it can't be.
That's already really narrow.
Yeah, it's really small
That
as it
starts
needs to.
bugging me when you get a little, it's pointless.
Yeah. It becomes a pathway, not a porch, so.
So I just want to make sure I understood what you said. There is a scenario where there's no rear yard variance, and the front yard variance is closer to 6 or 7 feet instead of 12. So that would basically push the corners of the house back into that zone, and just the porch would be sticking out. Is that,
That's right.
yeah? Okay.
That would put the front yard of 220 arc going across the front porch, not through the house.
Yeah, okay.
And we have not heard from these neighbors behind.
We've not heard anything from any neighbor.
Of course, Mr. Rigby, I'm hoping that we'll vote on, what we originally wanted, but that negotiation is available, or some part of it.
All right. Is there a motion from the board?
This is Kirk. I'll move to grant the variance.
Okay. There is a motion to grant the variance.
Second.
There's a second. All in favor? All right. All opposed? So the motion fails. Is there, I'll entertain a second motion if there is one.
Motion to deny the variance.
Okay. So
Are you,
the variance was not granted because it was a tie.
It was a motion, it's a 3-3 tie.
3-3 ties, so it fails for not carrying, right?
I don't know that there's a second motion.
Is there an opportunity for a second motion, I guess, is the
For
question.
the second option, is that what you're asking?
Is there a second option?
We've not been presented a second option.
Well, you haven't been presented a second option, right? Staff hasn't.
Correct.
Okay.
So we haven't advertised for another option.
Well, the other option would just be a front yard variance,
be a less-
but it would
less
be
variance.
of 6 feet instead of 12.
saying we don't
That
satisfy
wouldn't be advertised differently.
But I'm just saying we didn't.
We didn't advertise for that. Okay, all right, so it fails.
Okay.
I was just trying to get discussion at the time, so they didn't know what to do coming back.
Gotcha. All right. That takes us to our next public hearing for case number 2983. KPS Group has filed a request for site plan amendment for Oxford Surgery Center for property located at 499 Azalea Drive.
Okay, the subject property is about 2.5 acres located on Azalea Drive and is the current site of the Oxford Surgery Center. Applicant is proposing to expand the building to the south, the rear of the lot, and add 4,600 square feet of additional space that would contain new operating rooms and storage and prep space, as well as some additional parking. The resulting building would be a little bit over 19,000 square feet. So that use remains appropriate for the TNB zoning, as the expanded facility will remain under 20,000 square feet, and parking is calculated one space for each 250 of gross floor area, meaning 77 spaces are required and 77 are provided. TNB districts allow for 8% impervious coverage, and the applicant is proposing 55. Per comments from Fire and Environmental Services, coverage will likely increase slightly to allow for additional room to maneuver those large trucks. For landscaping, a landscaping plan has been provided. It shows new edge plantings and parking lot trees. The dumpster enclosure will require screening, but again, they're working through the final details of that with Environmental Services right now. They'll need to provide screening on an updated landscaping plan. As no significant trees are proposed to be removed, no mitigation is required for this site. For building materials, similar materials will be used, including a brick veneer and cast stone water table, to match as close as possible with the existing building to provide a more seamless transition. Both the existing and new brick veneers will be lime washed, which should hide any variation between the materials. And engineering provided some minor comments, but they're more technical in nature. Staff recommends approval of the requested site plan amendment for Oxford Surgery Center with the 5 conditions that are in the report.
Thank you, Robert. Questions from the commission? Any questions online? Commissioner Milo?
From me.
Would anyone else wish to speak on this? All right. Unless there are questions, I'll entertain a motion on this one.
Motion to approve the 5 staff conditions.
I have a motion to approve, subject to staff conditions. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. All in favor? Commissioner Milam, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. It's approved. And that brings us to case number 2986. Elysian Mathis has filed a request for a variance from section 3.6.2.2 care centers and care homes parking for property located at 1559 Charger Lane.
So the subject property is a little over 3.5 acres in the Adams Highway 30 commercial subdivision. Applicant is looking to construct a building to house a Little Angels daycare, and the daycare is proposed to be about 4,700 square feet and will serve children from infants to 5, actually I should say to 9. This request is a variance from the parking minimum for the use. Parking for daycares is calculated at 1 space for each employee and 1 space for each 5 enrolled persons at maximum capacity. Per communications with applicant's design team, there will be 6 supervision spaces with those listed capacities. Using the staffing ratios from MSDH, that staffing is going to require at a bare minimum 10 caregivers for the facility, and that's without any additional staff like front office. With 75 potential children at max capacity, this would require an additional 15 spaces for a grand total of 25 required spaces per the code. The applicant is requesting to provide 16, which is a variance of about 36%. The applicant contends that 6 spaces for non-staff parking is sufficient, and that due to the nature of this business, the drop-off area will be utilized at a far greater ratio than the parking spaces. Imposing a strict application of the Land Development Code is not practical for the nature of this business, and it will only create more impervious coverage and unnecessary cost. And a granting of this variance will only benefit this property and the adjoining properties and neighbors because it will decrease impervious coverage. While staff is sympathetic to the desire to minimize impervious coverage and to reduce cost to the business, the potential for 75 children to be enrolled simultaneously with only 6 parking spaces, one of which is handicap accessible, is problematic. While some parents will likely use the pickup drop-off lane due to the lack of parking spaces, it is likely that parents will also park in the through lane of the parking lot, creating congestion as some cars are temporarily blocked. Staff does acknowledge that for the majority of the day, the demand for parking is low. However, there is a demand surge that occurs during a 30 to 45-minute window in the morning and then again at the afternoon. And also in the circumstance that there is the need for early send home due to weather-related concerns, that will also create another congestion issue. And because of that, staff does recommend denial of the requested variance.
Thank you, Robert. So at maximum capacity, 75 kids.
Correct.
Which would require 10 caregivers apart from any front office staff they may or may not have. And there are currently 16 spaces proposed. And one of those is ADA,
Yes.
right? Okay, so that leaves effectively 5 spaces. Okay. And presumably, excuse me, the stacking, if it went out to the street, would then stack back towards Highway 30?
More than likely, yes.
Yeah, okay. Questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, if you could bear with the applicant one moment, they're trying to call in.
Okay.
Trying to get them the contact information.
Sure.
So if you bear with just for a minute, please.
Okay. Give them a minute. Robert, do you know how many spaces could stack between the street and the front door roughly?
I have not measured that.
Well, I think we looked at it and it seemed like 4 or 5
Okay.
spaces seemed to be reasonable. Didn't have a measurement on there, but.
Yeah.
Oop, here we go. Jeff Williams is on the line.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey, sorry, guys.
No problem. We were just getting to questions, so are there questions from the commission? No questions? Jeff, is there anything you want to say about this site?
No, I think we made some changes based on some of the comments. Tried to make the site as disruptive to the area as possible, and we feel like that we met the requirements for the owner, and we asked for these variances from the city.
Okay. If there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion for the variance.
I make a motion, we deny.
I have a motion to deny. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor of denial? Commissioner Mylum, how do you vote?
Yes.
All right, the variance request is denied. And that is the end of our agenda, so I'll entertain a motion for us to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn, is there a second? Second, all in favor?
All right.
Thank you.